Every survivor of every war, wherever in the world, must have a story to tell. We, as the survivors of the Boko Haram insurgency in Borno, also have our stories to tell the rest of the world. It is not a coincidence that Borno State is known and called the home of peace. It is called the home of peace because of its long history of peaceful coexistence with diverse cultures from other parts of the country and across the world. Isn't it therefore ironic that this home of peace should be besieged by a calamity in the gravity of what we have seen? It all started on the 26th day of July 2009. Like most residents in Borno, in Maiduguri city, I was sleeping when my subconscious mind was seared by hovering fighter jets, heavy bombing, sporadic gunshots from the fringes. That night stole the peace from every resident in the city. In all of my existence, I had never been a witness to such military artilleries in one spot. Except, of course, those that I have encountered in movies that I have watched, Arnold Schwarzenegger's Commando, Terminator, Sylvester Stallone's Rambo. These were the closest that I have come to that kind of experience. But we in Borno have always been a very, very peaceful people. And we lived each day as it came, so that when we were met with this calamity, because we didn't know what else to do. We were never in the habit of stocking food in large quantities in our homes. And do not forget that I said it started on the 26th day of July. The month had already ended. We are mostly civil servants in Maiduguri. So we had no food in our homes. Neighbors spoke in hushed voices, and there was a dusk to dawn curfew imposed on the state. Children could no longer play their age. It was a war situation. On the first and second days of that war, I'm sure many of us here can still recollect, it was fierce battle. Fierce, fierce battle. And there was no movement. Neighbors spoke only in hushed voices. The hovering fighter jets were still above us, flying day and night. Because people could not move out, could not interact with one another, everyone was just still. It was a gloomy period in our lives. But on the third day, something happened. Although most residents of this city were not aware, just as I myself wasn't aware. There was some kind of truce, I think for 2, 3, or 4 hours at the most, for some people to find food, perhaps, and then medication for those that were ill or wounded. And immediately after those stipulated time, the 2, 3 hours, the lockdown continued again, and it was ceaseless machine guns, ceaseless firing, gunshots, bombs everywhere. It was a serious war situation for us. So in those 5 days, I'll recap, most families suffered hunger. In those 5 days, Essential services like water and light were gone. In those 5 days, if you had whatever money that you had in your house, it was useless because you could not use such money. Our telephone services were not working because all the networks were jammed. In those 5 days, we suffered psychological trauma, the magnitude of which only we can tell the stories. As a literary analyst, I will take you to some of our writers. J.P. Clark, one of Nigeria's very finest poets, once said in his poem titled Casualty, he says that the casualties of any war or conflict are not those that have died, because they are way out of it. The casualties, he says, are those that are living daily and perpetually being psychologically traumatized by the conflict or war in which they are living. In this sense, therefore, we, the survivors of the Boko Haram in Maiduguri, are the casualties. We are the real casualties and not the dead. But, you know, in this 1 decade-long crisis, everyone who has witnessed this must have a gory story to tell. And the story that happened in Benishek in 2013 readily comes to my mind. Innocent travelers. You know, during that period, we must remember also that for about 6 months, we had no telephone services in Maiduguri. So people's businesses were truncated. People whose relations were elsewhere and wanted to tell their family members elsewhere that they were okay, needed to travel from Maiduguri to Damaturu, a distance of at least slightly above 100 kilometers. Now, in between Maiduguri and Damaturu is Benishek. On that fateful day, the perpetrators of this heinous crime executed every innocent traveler on that road. Every innocent traveler was executed on that road. These were innocent people going to make phone calls to better their lives or inform their families that they were okay. But the surprising thing was, these perpetrators left 2 or 3 people alive. And we ask, why did they leave these 2 or 3 people alive? It was for them to narrate to the rest of the population what had happened or had taken place that fateful day. Making it that storytelling is important. And to have people to tell the story as it is also very important. But reporters that came from other parts of the world reported that singular incident in various ways. One caption said, Borno State had become the most dangerous spot in West Africa. Others said that the Boko Haram was one of the world's deadliest terrorist group. All of this reportage can be correct. But no report remembered that some people were left alive to report this incident. Do their stories not count for anything? The world should give these people the opportunity to tell the story, their own story, because that story is theirs to tell. In this sense, you know, it is reported that about 37,000 people have lost their life as a result of this crisis that we have faced. But what about the over 2 million people who have been displaced, who are living in IDP camps, who are suffering, going through hideous difficulties that maybe NGOs and humanitarian services give palliative respite to. What about their stories? Should we, as citizens of the world, not listen to such stories? We must remember that this is not peculiar or limited to the stories around Borno State or the northeast of Nigeria or even the Boko Haram. The Syrian war that is still raging on has its victims. United Nations has published a death toll of 400 to 520 dead. But what about the millions of Syrians, refugee Syrians that are scattered all over Europe and other countries like Lebanon and Turkey? What about their stories? One of Africa's, as a literary analyst, I take you back to one of Africa's foremost writers from war-torn Somalia. His name is Nuruddin Farah. Nuruddin Farah wrote in his novel. In this novel, Links, he traces the trauma of wars, because I'm sure we all know that Somalia has been experiencing this turmoil for decades now. Nuruddin Farah says, apart from the effect and traumatic effects of war on humans, that even animals show these traumas. For the humans, he says, women, the physiology of a woman in childbearing age can suddenly cease. Her monthly period ceases. For animals like the cattle, he says, because they are terrorized, they are not used to this war environment. Sometimes the cattle can also run mad. He says the donkeys will be brained, that you will go to an environment and you see animals running helter-skelter. The chickens, he recognized, that could not lay a single egg in weeks. So that tells us that, as storytellers, we need to report the traumas of wars on human beings and our environment. So if war affects humans as well as animals, who then should tell the stories for us human beings? The traumas of wars are real. You will shortly see a clip of some women, because wars have, over the years now, changed the original orders of societies. Women have increasingly become the heads of their families. They are now the breadwinners for their children. Children who have lost both parents now are the breadwinners for their siblings. In this picture, this is a victim of the Boko Haram insurgent here in Borno. Who should tell the story for this woman? The best story will be heard from her own mouth. Nobody can tell the story, because what she feels, the trauma that she experienced during this crisis, she alone can tell the rest of the world as it is. Yes. Now you have other areas, scenarios where children are the only survivors in a family, and such children are left to take care of their siblings, even when they themselves are minors. This brings me to one workshop that I had attended in 2017. This workshop was organized by the Embassy of the Netherlands in Nigeria, and it was tagged R2R, responsibility to report. It was a very notable outing for me, because it was at that conference or workshop that I realized, having traced the people responsible for reporting conflict in some spots in Nigeria, that I truly realized that one needs really to have been part of a conflict, to have experienced a conflict, to be able to report it completely and truly. Such that, yes, this is another women-headed family that we have seen in Borno, because these women are now having to go out in search for food, because they are now the breadwinners because their husbands have been killed. Now, this workshop had opened my perspective broadly, because it dawned on me that people who come from elsewhere to come and just, like snapshotting a particular event, they will write their stories and project these same stories to the world. This can never be the complete part of that story. That story needs concisive, in-depth interpretation, because the trauma of wars are felt internally, because every survivor of war has the pains inside. So that as storytellers, we should claim our stories, we should tell our stories, and the world should hear the stories from our mouths, because hopefully we think that the perpetrators of such wars may have a rethink towards causing trouble around the world. Continually allowing people coming from outside to tell our own stories will only give, because they will just theorize our pains and our stories. They will theorize our stories, and there can be nothing concrete that can come out of it. So we, as the survivors of this crisis, should take the reins ourselves and find ways to counter negative narratives about our collective pains. Thank you.